A stranger saved my life, but how did he die years before we met? The worst moment of my life came on a Tuesday afternoon, not with a whisper, but with the roar of twisting metal and splintered glass. I'm Ethan, 35, and I'm a structural engineer, the kind of person who believes in physics, logic, and the immutable laws of cause and effect. I was supervising the demolition of the old Blackwood Tower in downtown. It was a controlled implosion, designed to drop the 40-story structure neatly into its own footprint. My job was to ensure the perimeter was clear and the blast sequence was perfect. But something went wrong. A crucial support column failed prematurely, causing a catastrophic domino effect that sent a massive section of the concrete facade tumbling outwards, right over the supposed safety zone where I was standing. I saw the shadow of the falling debris, heard the death rattle of the concrete coming down, and knew in that split second that my ordered life was over. I froze, paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming physics of destruction. Then, a hand slammed into my back, shoving me with impossible force. I tumbled 10 feet sideways, landing hard on the pavement as the thunderous wave of compressed air and pulverized stone crashed exactly where I had been standing. My ears were ringing, my lungs choked with dust, but I was alive. I struggled to sit up, coughing, looking for the person who had saved me. He was standing there, dusting off his hands, entirely calm amidst the chaos. He looked to be around 30, maybe a bit younger, lean, with intensely quiet, observant eyes. He wore a simple, worn leather jacket that seemed out of place among the hard hats and high-vis vests. "You should really check the primary load-bearing shear wall next time, Ethan," he said, his voice level despite the noise. He spoke my name with the casual intimacy of an old friend. How did you know my name?" I gasped, still covered in dust, my logical mind scrambling to catch up with my near-death experience. He just offered a small, sad smile, a look of profound recognition, and then turned to walk away, blending into the frantic crowd of emergency crews rushing toward the scene. I tried to follow, but my adrenaline crashed. I shouted, "Wait, who are you?" He didn't turn back, but just before he disappeared, I saw him pause, and he held up one hand, flashing a distinct, small silver ring on his index finger. It was the only answer he gave me. When I finally recovered enough to walk back to where he had stood, I found one thing lying on the dust-covered pavement, a thin leather wallet. Inside, a recently issued driver's license. The name on the license was Silas Vance, age 30. The photo matched the man who saved me perfectly. I held the wallet, warm from his touch, a trophy of the impossible. A stranger saved my life, but how did he know my name and the precise point of failure in the demolition? If a complete stranger saved your life with impossible foresight, knowing your name and the details of your job, would you immediately treat him as a guardian angel or a terrifying anomaly? My rational mind, the mind that builds and verifies skyscrapers, demanded an answer. The emotional core that was now desperately indebted to Silas drove the search. I immediately started digging. The address on the license led me to a quiet, tree-lined street about an hour outside the city, a place far removed from the cold steel and concrete of my professional life. The house was small, well-maintained, and felt instantly domestic and warm, a complete contrast to the sharp energy of the man I met at the demolition site. A woman opened the door. She looked around 58, kind eyes lined with deep sadness. I introduced myself, explaining that I was trying to return Silas's wallet. I held up the license. The woman's hand went to her mouth, and her eyes filled with an instant, terrible recognition that quickly turned to pain. "Silas," she whispered, "where did you find this?" I explained the accident, the debris, and the impossible timing of his intervention. I watched her face as I spoke, expecting shock, confusion, or gratitude. Instead, I saw a terrible, quiet grief. She introduced herself as Eliza, 58, Silas's mother. She invited me in, sitting me down in a living room filled with framed photos of a younger, smiling Silas. "Mr. Ethan," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something that won't make sense. But I promise you, I haven't seen that wallet in 5 years. And Silas, my Silas died 5 years ago." The air left my lungs. The immutable law of cause and effect had just been ripped apart. 5 years ago, I stammered, holding up the license which clearly listed him as age 30. "Yes," Eliza confirmed, tears finally falling. "He died in a structural collapse. He was 25. A warehouse roof caved in. He was working security nearby and rushed in when he heard the initial warnings. He saved 3 people, but he didn't make it out himself." I looked down at the license, the face of the man who saved me, the age 30, the recent issue date. Then I looked at the photograph on the mantelpiece. Silas at 25, the same intense eyes, the same build. The same person, yet separated by a vast, impossible temporal chasm. The man who saved my life, with his perfect timing and knowledge of my name, had died 5 years before we ever met. The life lesson here was staggering. Life isn't a straight line. Sometimes, the greatest sacrifices are paid backward through time. I couldn't leave it there. I shared my theory with my colleague, Chloe, 33, a brilliant, skeptical analyst who specialized in data retrieval. She found no digital trace of the 30-year-old Silas Vance, only the official death certificate for Silas Vance, age 25, 5 years prior. The man I met was a ghost with a current driver's license. My obsession took a darker turn. I had to understand why he saved me. I went back to Eliza. She was surprisingly open, almost relieved to share her son's impossible story. She told me that before his death, Silas had become obsessed with saving a specific person. He felt like he was failing someone, Eliza explained, showing me Silas's childhood bedroom, now preserved as a shrine. He used to draw these complicated maps and diagrams. He was working on what he called the silver thread. The silver thread was a theory Silas developed. Every life is connected by key moments of crisis. If one person dies prematurely, their moment of crisis is inherited by someone else, like a debt. Silas believed that since he failed to save himself in his accident, he was destined, in some capacity, to save the one who inherited his debt, the one who was destined to die in a similar, structural failure. I looked at the diagrams. They were crude, amateurish drawings of collapsing towers and falling debris. Then, my blood ran cold. One of the diagrams was a perfect, rudimentary sketch of the Blackwood Tower demolition site, drawn years before the tower was even scheduled for implosion. And scrawled beneath the drawing was a name, Ethan. The drawings confirmed it. Before his death at 25, Silas knew my name and the specific disaster that would nearly kill me a decade later. He had foreseen it, felt the gravity of it, and dedicated his remaining consciousness to preventing it. But the real mystery wasn't just the foresight, it was the ring. Did Silas wear a ring? I asked Eliza, describing the small, silver band on his index finger. That's my favorite part, she smiled sadly. He had it custom made before the warehouse collapse. It was engraved on the inside with an astronomical coordinate. He said it was the exact point in the sky where he was born. He said, if I ever lose myself, the stars will bring me back. If you realized that the man who saved your life knew you would almost die years before you met, what moral obligation would you feel toward his memory? The truth was now undeniable. Silas Vance was a 5-year-old temporal echo, a projection of an intensely focused will powered by the astronomical energy of his original birth. His love, his need to correct his own failure, somehow manifested him at age 30, the age he should have been, to pull me out of the collapse that mirrored his own death. I knew he hadn't just saved my life, he had given me his. I felt an immediate, crippling guilt. My life was now living proof of Silas's theory and his impossible, desperate sacrifice. But the question remained, why me? Why had I inherited the debt? I went back to the details of his original death, the warehouse collapse 5 years ago. I pulled up the public records. Silas had been a security guard, and he died saving 3 maintenance workers from the falling roof. The owner of that warehouse, a holding company named Horizon Holdings. I knew that name. Horizon Holdings was the company I had founded right after college, selling it off 2 years ago for a massive profit. I was obsessed with minimizing costs back then, focusing on the bottom line. I frantically searched the old files. And there it was, buried deep in the corporate reports from 7 years ago. The warehouse roof was flagged for a critical structural defect. The report had been intentionally suppressed by my team to avoid expensive repairs, right before I sold the company. The structure that killed Silas at age 25 was defective because of a decision I made at age 28. The full, devastating reality snapped into place. Silas didn't inherit a random debt, he was killed by the consequence of my earlier moral failure. His prophecy wasn't about saving a random person, it was about saving the person who inadvertently caused his death, the person whose life was, in a cosmic sense, owed to him. The man who saved my life was a ghost with a 5-year-old death certificate, and he died because of my own negligence. The life lesson that hit me was blindingly clear. Every action, especially one driven by greed or moral negligence, creates a consequence that resonates through the timeline, and sometimes, the universe sends the victim back to save the perpetrator. I couldn't just continue my life, successful and saved, knowing the foundation of my survival was the ghost of my own moral debt. The man who saved me had died because I prioritized profit over people. I went back to Eliza. I didn't confess the dark truth of the warehouse failure, that guilt was mine to carry alone. I simply told her I felt a profound connection to her son's philosophy, the silver thread. I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a check that wiped out my entire personal savings. It was a massive amount, enough to secure Eliza's comfort for life and establish a foundation. I founded the Silas Vance Foundation for Structural Safety. I used all my considerable professional expertise and remaining corporate connections not to build, but to tear down, to expose, and to fix. I focused on tracing and reporting all suppressed structural integrity reports in the city, using the very skills I once exploited for profit. I became an honest structural engineer, dedicated to eliminating the kind of negligence that killed Silas. I sold my expensive car, moved out of the penthouse, and started living a life that reflected integrity, not success. The sacrifice was immense, but the phantom weight of the concrete crushing me was finally gone. I still wear the wallet. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the new, modest office I now keep, checking blueprints for safety issues, I hold the silver ring that Silas's mother gave me, the one with the coordinates. I look at it, and I feel him there, not as a ghost, but as a moral compass. I realize that Silas didn't just save my life from the debris, he saved my soul from the man I had become. He didn't break the laws of physics, he simply proved that love and selflessness are the only forces strong enough to bend the timeline and correct the deepest moral debts. I am still Ethan, 35, but I am now living the life that Silas Vance, the 30-year-old ghost, gave me. I want to know what you think. If you knew your life was saved by a person who died because of your own past mistake, would you be able to live with that guilt, or would you dedicate your life to continuing their moral mission, even if it meant sacrificing all your success? Let me know your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.